Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hot off the press of something so relevant to this field, the Duolingo scandal, the AI first scandal. To fill people in, the CEO a matter of weeks ago said, we're going to go AI first with this company after some quite exceptional PR stunts, killing the Duolingo owl earlier in the year. But there's been a huge backlash to this AI first strategy from the company. Grassroots level rebellion, as it were, mass boycotting of the app, even the share price going down. And if you go to their Instagram, Twitter, TikTok feeds now, they've wiped the whole lot, and they said we'll be back soon with this AI first strategy. Because people say they want the teacher, they want the human, and I can think of no better guess for a human teacher, and who's well known in the industry as being one of the most approachable and engaging and friendly and supportive mentors and teachers, in all seriousness. And what better human teacher to perhaps give a bit more nuance to this idea, and perhaps a hypothesis of teacher first, but AI supported. So I'll hand over to Richard now and some of his findings with emergent language.
So it's an interest. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I think you might want to add to that Luddite, maybe. I'm really not anti-AI at all, and I think that the possibilities of it are really tantalizing, very exciting for education. But as you guys have been looking into with some of our colleagues at KCL, we've got to take an ethical approach to it. There was a lot of panic at the beginning that we're not going to need a teacher anymore. I don't really believe that. I think what the teacher does is extremely important and very nuanced in terms of responding to what's happening in class. And one day maybe AI will get there, and maybe we won't have jobs. But at the moment, I think we are necessary. But I do think there are areas in classroom life where AI can actually be a good support for teachers in terms of working with what emerges in class. So my area of research is in looking at the kind of improvised moments in class, the bits that you can't plan, or that's the bit I'm really interested in, that kind of bit that's been left out of a lot of the literature because it's difficult to deal with. But it's what we all do as teachers. We respond to what comes up in class, or we don't. There's a lot of evidence in the literature that supports us actually responding to what does emerge and helping the learners at that point of need. So I think, for me, when learners have a language question, it can be quite daunting for teachers, especially, new teachers, but even experienced teachers. As the learner says, teacher, why can't I say? Or, let's say you've got a monolingual class and says, how do you say? And you're not sure. I mean, you could reach for Google Translate. That's been there for a long time. It doesn't always get it right, does it? And I'm not saying that AI will, but we could certainly use it either to help the teacher prepare for class or to respond to some of these emergent language moments that happen. And there's a couple of ways in which you could do this. Now, I haven't been in the classroom myself for a couple of years, but I've watched a lot of teaching, and I talk to a lot of teachers who are there in this AI revolution that's happening, and teachers are increasingly starting to use it in their practice. So I thought, how would I go about doing this in class? Those sticky moments where the student asks a question, you're not sure what to do, and you're in the heat of the moment. You might put something on the board and you think that's fine, and you look back at it a bit later and you think, I'm not actually sure if that was that useful. But I think we need to have that confidence as teachers, and that does come the more experience we have in going, I'm not sure. Let's have a look and see what Gemini or ChatGPT or Copilot has to say about it. And that kind of researching language, I think, is a really useful thing for us as teachers because we're gaining knowledge. But it also makes the language learning process more of a community of practice as well. And the learners can gain from that as well, in terms of, that's how you research language, or that's how you maybe don't trust what the AI gives you straight away. I've got a couple of slides. Do you want me to show you some of the activities that I was playing with?
That'd be amazing. Thank you.
So as I said, it can be complex dealing with language on the spot when you're asked things. So, especially if you're not confident about that language yourself, if you're a newer teacher, or maybe you don't have English as a first language and you feel a little insecure about maybe some of the things the learners are asking about, maybe the collocations that might be very kind of nativist, but maybe that's what the students are asking about. So it's having that little bit of confidence to deal with those questions. So one of the things you can do is the obvious thing would be to look for collocations, find collocations. Let's say you want to have a look, and this is, I thought about this myself. I mentioned the native speaker thing. English is my first language. I wouldn't be able to come up with a list at all that and categorize it the way AI did in seconds. So actually it can take a bit of thinking work from me. So actually I can start dealing with this here, this language here. So, let's have a look at this, have plus verb, possession, experience. It suddenly categorizes this. This is just an example, but I can then make a decision about whether which bits I want to use. Maybe when the learners are busy, I could even get this up, have a quick look at it. So, when we're multitasking, teaching is a complex open skill. We're constantly multitasking. Actually, maybe this takes one job away from the teacher having to think of all those things. And let me tell you, the older you get, the harder it is to have that instant recall. So I think AI can really step in here. And again, you're in charge of deciding, filtering what the AI gives you and what you want to give to the learners. Another way that you can use it is paradigmatic extension, where we can look at what other possibilities there are in a sentence, lexically or meaning related ways. And one of the ways I was thinking about this came up in a lesson that I was talking to a teacher about recently. And the word angry came up. And obviously, off the top of my head, we can probably think of lots of words related to angry. And one of our jobs for students who've got more proficiencies to kind of push them off a plateau and provide them with lots of choices of language that they might want to add, to their language knowledge and their repertoire linguistically. And it came up with this really interesting thing. This was on Gemini. So it suddenly categorized general anger. So I thought, right, I've got some data here I could work with the learners. And then it came up with, so, I might not use them all. It might not be appropriate for a class to use pissed off, but it certainly might be with the right kind of class. Now, it doesn't give me a lot here because we're taking that language out of context. But what you can do is then to ask, this is what the AI prompt finished with. There were many more, far too much data actually, but it gave me something. You could give you some things to pick from. And it said the best choice will depend on the specific situation and intensity of your anger. So we've got this disembodied lexis at the moment. Then I asked it this: what situations can you use the informal phrases for? Let's focus on those. And it gave me, okay, I'm not going to read these through, but among friends, with family, it gave me different scenarios of where I could use this. And this could provide me with a way of exploring that language with the learners. It's important these phrases should be treated with caution. They can be considered strong language and might not be appropriate in all such situations, such as, and then it gives you a list of different situations. So I'm not saying you should be completely reliant on this, the teacher, but you can certainly use it as a tool to help support that thinking that's happening in the moment. Something that came up out of an example we were looking at, the mediator between A and B. So I had a look, what can it tell me about this? Well, it can give me examples of how this particular chunk of language can be used when we've got a choice, the mediator between pattern. And then it asked me this question. It said, would you like me to help you with the specific structure? You've preempted this for me. And then it gives me some of the grammatical information that I could then give to learners, a passive voice, basic statement with a modal verb in a complex sentence. So off the top of my head, I couldn't do any of these. I find it quite tricky to do some of these things, certainly the complex sentence, trying to build that in your head, as you're online doing it in the moment. I think it's quite hard to do. So I think it's a way of, providing us with some data for this. And again, it's asked at the end, would you like me to tailor the sentence for a specific situation? So it's got these very intuitive prompts that we can explore. Now, I talked to a teacher. This is Danny Cavani, my colleague, and I've also been supervising him on his dissertation on this area. And one of the things that we were talking about with this is that sometimes what comes up is not what you want, or you might think it might be a bit hammy or a bit artificial. And actually, that can also provide a learning opportunity to explore why that option is not correct. So that in turn can be a springboard for more discussion about language with the right kind of class, if you've got that time and space to do it in class. But certainly I think it's useful learner training. He had quite an introverted I think they were pre-advanced class, advanced class, let's say. And they didn't want to use the course book. They didn't like them. So they got rid of the course books, and he had to focus on emergent language. So it's something he does like doing. So lucky for him that they wanted to do this kind of work. And one example that he showed me, he came up in class, is the not very high frequency I'm not well versed in. Putting that into AI, suddenly we can get lots of different examples of how that's used. Yeah. Again, I don't have to think of them all in the moment. Sometimes, what I might think of in a very contrived way will actually come out in a very contrived way on the board and be really quite artificial. As we were saying before, when you stand back and you think, I'm not sure if that sounds like something that anybody would actually say. It gives you a moment to step back and reflect, and then you can analyze rather than having to come up with the example. And again, at the bottom, it says, would you like alternative ways to say this? Amazing, right? This advanced class, you've got the AI is then giving you some more data that you can play with afterwards. This kind of unplugged way of working, really, I think one of the issues is thinking in the moment, we might miss some of the wider pragmatic issues, the kind of when can you use this? Who can you use this with? What kind of person would say this? What effect would this have on a person when speaking? That's what we can ask the AI to support with as well if we're not quite sure. Danny said that one example came up in his class, which was usually only teenagers would say this. And he disagreed with this. He said, well, actually, that's not true. And again, this provided an opportunity to explore language that came up. I think a nice follow-on from this is to think, throw it back to the learners and how does this work in your language? And then you can have a sort of meta-linguistic discussion, they're kind of bringing translanguaging into this as well. So, really working with language, which we don't, very often we have those moments in class when we have those meta-linguistic discussions, but they're often quite ephemeral and they're not, we don't record them. But they're quite important in language learning, if you think about it. But Danny reported that he felt quite excited by working at the edge of what the learners knew. They felt very focused, or he could see that they were very focused. It was very generative in terms of conversation in this way that I've described before. But there was really general interest and motivation in working like this in class, incorporating this. They're all focused on a goal together as a class to understand this piece of language. The learners had this to say. They said, AI seems different to any other classes, this use of it. It seems modern. We've got to think about the people who we're teaching and the generation that we're teaching. There was lots of group reflection on the language together, and I think they enjoyed this. They were quite, an introverted class, but this really brought them together. And they used different texts, and they were looking at text. They were mining the text for different features. So they were all kind of individually engaged in different activities, but using the AI as part of it. However, in the talk that I gave on this earlier this year, I did say, the caution is that we've got to think about the planet. And as I discovered to my horror, as I Googled, as I put into AI how much water is used, there are some issues with AI and its effects on the environment. So maybe we do need to think about not completely replacing the teacher, but maybe the teacher can sparingly use AI as a support for what they're doing in class, and to take some of the heavy load and the heavy working that's going on in the working memory in class. So that's kind of what I reported on earlier this year, and I think it is something that we'll see increasingly in language teaching. It's something that's not going to go away, but we've got to embrace it and look at how we can use it effectively.
Amazing. I think you'll be one of the next contractors for Duolingo when they sort of...
I'm not sure they'd want me.
No, because it was all sparked on LinkedIn. Oh no, it was all sparked on LinkedIn. So
Was it really?
you never know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
slide into
I've
the
got my issues
DMs.
with Duolingo anyway. I mean, it's, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
I was trying to do, my Spanish is quite high level, and I thought, well,
yeah.
I'll just tone it up a little bit with all the bits that, that I've, bits of grammar and stuff I'm not sure. And using the Duolingo, I just got so bored because, I didn't want to go to the circus, and the the language that, the situation, the language. I found it not me personally. I know some people say that the crazy situations that make it memorable, but I found it quite frustrating. And then I found it frustrating that it nagged me to go back onto it.
Have you done your
Yeah,
famous
yeah,
thing?
yeah, yeah,
Have you
yeah.
done your
No, I
exercises
haven't.
today?
And leave me alone. Stop telling me what to do. Yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
moving to another expert, I know Rebecca has been researching this since her master's and continues to. I just wondered if you have any reflections or further findings to share with Richard, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. And thanks, Richard. That was a really great overview of the kind of emergent language and kind of an introduction to what it is and what it looks like in the classroom and the kind of connection of technology. And I thought it was really interesting how you said it was quite intuitive and it was telling you or giving you extra prompts like, would you like to use this in a sentence or in different ways, or it categorized it in different situations. And I think that's one of the unique things about the generative AI, because it's trained on real human language, things people have written, whether they've given permission or not for it to be used. So it can sometimes give those insights into language use, and that can be really helpful for teachers on the spot in the classroom. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And I just wanted to go back to kind of basics and ask a question. So in emergent language and teaching it in the classroom, has technology been a part of that in the history of teaching emergent language, or is this something you think is very new with generative AI?
Well, I mean, so the term emergent languages I mentioned, it's got its origins in dogma and ELT and teaching unplugged, which was, I mean, I don't think it actually was, but the idea of dogma was to strip things back. And it was actually things like flashing lights and course books were getting in the way. So I think actually it's something that wasn't really used. But I think actually what it does do, and this is what Danny's been looking at, it's kind of it's looking for those affordances in dogma and realizing them. So, one of the criticisms of dogma was that, where did the text come from? Well, the learners bring them in. But what about, if I'm in class? So you can actually generate text quite quickly, and that's something that as I say, Danny's been exploring in his classes. So I think it's moved a long way. There hasn't been a history of it, but I think it will actually, create an opportunity actually for that kind of technology to support that kind of spontaneous teaching as well, where it's hard to do it, as I say, on your own in class sometimes.
Yes, when you were describing that situation, it reminded me of my first experiences teaching in Japan, and they had a blackboard and a very old, massive TV that only had 3 different colors to plug things into. And I'd managed to make a video of my travel to England and plug it in with an iPod Touch into the TV, and just trying to use anything in the classroom outside of your own mind, it was quite tricky. But now, like you were saying, that there's a lot of tools and kind of teachers like Danny and his research, they're using them in innovative and interesting ways. So I wanted to ask, so in Danny's results, students were finding it really motivating and engaging, and the teacher as well was finding it really interesting. But I wondered, because Danny's an experienced teacher, and you said like that class was quite suited to that approach because they weren't that interested in using course books and the traditional learning isolated grammar points and vocabulary. But what do you think are things that teachers that maybe want to try this kind of approach maybe should keep in mind, or do you have any recommendations for them?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not all in the privileged position that we can just abandon the course book and the syllabus and work exactly with what the learners want. And it was a specific class, and I've had classes that have not liked working like that and wanted to use the course book. So the advice that another Danny Norwich Davis, and I, who have written about this and researched it, is start little and often. So it doesn't have to be the whole lesson in this way, but it might be in a bit, you might give them a task, let's say, sort of like a TBL kind of task, where there's some sort of outcome. And as you're listening to them, you've got the time to monitor. You pop up, on your phone or wherever else, do a little bit of language research that you're ready for feedback. And a simple little change like that might be something that you could try. Yeah, it might give you a bit more variety or confidence for things to feedback on. So if you're not an experienced teacher, the worry is, what am I going to say in feedback? I can't hear any mistakes, because you start grasping at language. But actually, you can stand back a bit, tune into what they're saying, note down a couple of things that they're saying, pop it into the AI. You can do it in seconds. Have a quick look. Is there anything there that might be useful? 1, 2. Let's have a look at those 3 bits that have come up. So it's a way of kind of supporting that process. And I'd say if you're new to it, a little bit, tiny, bit of feedback, maybe. If you don't want to do it open class because you think it takes your credibility away, understandable. That I remember feeling like that. You're a new teacher, you've got that feeling of like, I've got to know everything. I can't show. The more confidence you get, I'm not sure. Let's have a look. Let's find out. But if you are at the beginning, I think while they're busy, you've got that moment to kind of quickly check and put it up. But I think there's a real opportunity for learner training in here as well. So what can the learners do outside the classroom? I think that's one of our big focuses on emergent language has been that training the learners. How do they keep a lexical notebook? How do you use AI to support that? How do you go away and research the language yourself? So I think there's some things that can come out of it as well.
No, that's really great advice. And you actually preempted one of the things I was wondering is how people might actually be doing it in the classroom. So are they showing it up on a big IWB to everyone, or are they kind of discreetly checking on an iPad and then maybe writing something on the board? So that was really a good observation there, that say if you want to keep the kind of credibility of I'm the expert, then in a way you are, because you have to judge whether the generative AI output is accurate, and sometimes it's not. So during our research with Ursula Wingate and Chris Tribble, we were surveying students and we did focus groups, and some of them had used it in their pronunciation assignments in linguistic analysis, and its output on pronunciation was not very accurate at all. But because we'd been learning it and we had textbooks we could refer to, we were able to judge. But in the classroom, it might be a bit more tricky to do that. So doing it in a more controlled way, maybe.
I think you're absolutely right. But I mean, this isn't something new. I mean, look at course books. I mean, how many times have you been teaching something in a course book and you just think, who would say that? Or you've got a very hammy role player, or the dialogue in the. So it's always been there. I think maybe where the teacher training needs to go, or the teacher education needs to go, is on looking at what's there and judging whether that's useful. But that's part of the process of learning as well. As we do when we put up some random vocabulary on the board and I'm not sure how useful that was. It's all part of the learning process. But I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, and as I say, it's not nothing that we teachers aren't faced with anyway when you open. I won't name the course books, but any course book really.
No, that is very true. And definitely one of the findings of my research project across the English for academic purposes field in the UK is that there hasn't been enough training on how to actually use the tools, what their affordances and limitations are. So having teachers and students experimenting with that and seeing how it can help is an important part of the kind of self-directed learning about the tools as well. So that's a really good way to do it with the emergent languages that's coming up in the classroom.
I think it's something we're going to, in another year or so, we'll have a lot more for teachers to talk about regarding this. I've seen a few things come up on LinkedIn and various places of people trying things. And I think it's there's lots of possibilities there, and analyzing learner language as well. That's probably a possibility as well. Putting in data that you hear from the learners and looking at different. And before kind of the revolution came out, there were some Google tools. I don't know if you saw them, where you could put something in. You could say make it more informal, make it less informal. Do you remember those? I can't remember what they're called. It was called now. But I remember thinking at the time, this is a really interesting way to look at reformulation for different registers and different formalities. So I think there's definite potential in that. And then how do we train the learners to notice what's different? Yeah, because it's about looking at alternatives, emergent language, as opposed to saying what's right and what's wrong, and it's about allowing the learners to kind of make a decision about it. But it is, the things we do as teachers is very much about how do we activate that noticing, how do we encourage that noticing, how do we draw their attention to language. So I think there's certainly lots of. I mean, if I were teaching one-to-one, I think I'd be doing it all the time.
As Scott Thornbury says, a grammar of choices, an AI of choices. Okay. Anything else, Rebecca, or you wanted to comment on?
No, just finally, I really liked that you mentioned about the sustainability issue, because it's something that doesn't get talked a lot about in research. Like, a lot of the research about generative AI and the impacts on language learning and teaching, they're focused on just that pedagogical part or the outcome, and we don't really talk about the ethical issues that much. But you're right, the sustainability and the damage to the environment is very real, and it's not just the water use to keep the data centers cool, but the chips need to be updated all of the time. So there's a lot of waste that's being produced, and training the models as well is relying on very problematic labor practices. So there's so many things that we need to learn about, and then use that to inform how often, or if we decide to use the tools for our teaching. So I really liked that you're drawing attention to that with your presentation as well, Richard.
Yeah, I think it's something we've got to be aware of it, haven't we? And I think there's, I've been so many AI talks, as I'm sure everyone has, in the last couple of years, and you're right, it's something that people don't talk about enough, really.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for your time today, Richard. And I'm going to have to get in touch with Danny, I think, for the next.
I think you should, definitely.
There's
a lot more to say about it than me, I think.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Richard.